Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited for our episode today. Before I introduce you to our guest, here's a quote just for this episode. A man is his own easiest dupe. For what he wishes to be true, he generally believes to be true. Demosthenes.
Ooh,
Our guest today, advisor, mentor, leader of leaders in thought leaders around how to garner stage presence, create and craft the story, bring their product or service into the market at the highest level. That's why I had to choose Demosthenes. They've been helping leaders for well over a decade, but in their own business, they're founder of Keynote Content, author of Launch Plan, and has helped over 1,500 at least leaders in the space and been doing to over 1.5 million words written to help influencers and brands position themselves to get their message out there. Jon Cook, thank you so much for coming on the show, and shout out to our friend on the Culture Matters podcast, Andrea Dobkin, for introducing us. What a gift. I'm so excited to learn about the brain and speaking and all this stuff. So thanks for coming on the show.
absolutely. Hey, thanks for the invite, sir. It was great to connect. We were having just awesome conversations before and being able to kind of see where we already have some overlap as far as like shared interests and characteristics. And I'm excited to jump in. Let's tell some stories, okay?
Now, first of all, what is a story? What does a story mean to you? What is a story?
Great question. I believe a story is a truth or a principle that happens to be wrapped in emotion. Something that either we tell ourselves to remind us about what's true, or something that we tell to others in which we hope to share a belief. And in the idea of stories, you can capture where it's the textbook. Oh, it's a some type of tale, some type of idea that can be shared, but really captured inside a story is this idea of I want this to be true, and I believe you want this too. This is
Hmm.
why I'm telling you, because if I didn't share a story, then what's the point of a story?
Hmm. Um, what about so for early on when you were doing copywriting?
Mhm.
Was that the first time that you were introduced to the power of the story, or was it, or there, circumstances earlier on that influenced? Because yeah, it's an interesting path. When I was looking for the quote, for example, I got down rabbit hole on who this Demosthenes was, and where, and the stories have been around for thousands of years. So for you and your the story of your hero's journey, was it early on in doing copywriting, or was it even earlier than that that you were inspired to learn story and teach story?
Well, for my life, we'd have to wind the clock back to about 4 or 5 years old. It's a typical
Huh.
bedtime, story time, whatnot. And a lot of parents would typically read, like, hey, a good night moon, or, here's a Dr. Seuss, whatnot. And my dad is a tremendous storyteller, and it's one where he loves to take this idea of normal interactions, just everyday interactions with people, and then during his drive home, one of the ways that he would help his mind unwind from the stress is that he would take a simple interaction and say, I'm going to put this into my story. So I'm one of 5 kids, and it's when we were kind of huddle around the dinner table and just see, as he was saying, like, hey dad, so what did you do today? He said, I saw a dog pedaling a bike. Wow, who would? And this one, like, right from the first statement, you're drawn in, and that was my childhood. It was this kind of a mixology of storytelling from across all different walks of life and aspects. And the interesting thing is, like, that my dad didn't have that interesting of a job. He was a deli manager for a local, kind of a national, regional story, not a story, a kind of a grocery store chain, and he was a deli manager. And so these different interactions as he's driving to work, or as he's talking with people and slicing ham and trying to get things party platters, whatnot, and going like, that doesn't seem that interesting. But he took the arena that he was in and said, I want to bring home this gift of a story, because there's repetition, there's a lot of boredom that would come up with that type of setting, that type of role. He's done it for almost 20 years. But he
Wow.
chose to say, how can I bring the stories that popped out to me today. And then I get to be the architect for my kids' dreams tonight. And that is special.
What role does intention play with storytelling?
Storytelling without intention is little more than gossip. But storytelling with intention says, I happen to be telling you a truth, or happen to be telling you a principle, or something that I deeply wish to be true. And I happen to put characters and emotions and names and settings to it. And if we can share this story, maybe we can share this truth. Maybe we can feed off this belief and fuel and that fire of what will keep us going for the future. And with intention, I mean, great question. This idea of intention means if I'm going to tell a story, there is something fascinating about this. There's a detail, there's a statement, there's some type of aspect about what I actually do that allows me to say, I'm going to happen to tell you this whole story, and it's all about that one detail. Everything leading up to this is just that one detail. It's a statement, it's a quote, whatnot. It's the Star Wars, Luke, search your
Mm.
heart. It's the Hobbit. I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you. And it's the was it ever about the ring? Was it ever about a
This
lightsaber?
story you just said, The Hobbit, and all these emotions fled through my brain. And in our wedding ring, one ring to find them, one ring to bind them, and me and Jenna like is in
Yeah.
the ring because I love the fellowship of the ring. So like, why did I do that? Right? What is it about us human beings that I would associate such meaning to this ring that represents our marriage, and it has the line when Frodo's there. Are you a fan of the Lord of the Rings?
I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. Let's riff on this for a little
Yeah,
bit here
yeah, like because
because
that's real, right? It was visceral when you
absolutely.
said Lord of the Rings. I'm like, here's my ring, and I show people I'm the most proud about this. Um, my wife bought me a watch, and I don't care about that. I want to
Yeah,
show people this, like that type of.
absolutely.
So why? Why do I? Because this is, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So for the ring, the timeless practice of giving wedding rings and being able to say, hey, it's the purity of gold, it's the circular, where it's the unbroken circle, it's the one where it's all these different meanings and aspects to it. But what you did with your ring is that you brought your personal care into it. You brought in something that you likely have carried with you from childhood or being a teenager, and you brought that in saying, like, this means so much to me that I hope that the marriage that I'm saying yes to will be as timeless and as preserved as Tolkien's work. That it will
Mm.
be as revered and as respected and cherished as Tolkien's fans. That the people that engage with the work that we're doing as a couple, that we have as individuals, that is something special, and it allows me to take that truth and say, I'm going to gift this to Jenna, because this is not just a ring, but this is something that brings so much of my personal lens into the circle of gold, that it's more than just a ring. It's also a deeply held commitment before I ever heard your name.
Man, she's got to listen to this one. A
Well, the
beautiful.
funny thing is, my sister's name is Jenna.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yep.
I,
Yep.
I, 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 like when we're watching these movies, like whether it's the Lord of the Rings, is it? What about the characters? Like, what do they represent to us as people in your estimation? Having done such deep work around storytelling and like, because I'm thinking, right, there's an audience, just for the audience's sake, from my understanding, you're helping many subject matter experts stand on the stage, which is apparently one of the biggest fears. That's one of the things you've done,
Mm-hmm.
correct? Stand on the
Absolutely.
stage, address the crowd, and lead to an outcome, essentially. So the stage is the movie, there's a movie theater,
Absolutely.
there's an audience, and there's this a projection on the screen. It's more than the screen, right? So screen, what is it about the story that connects the audience to the speaker?
You said an incredible word that fits this context: projection. Because when we see movies, when we read books, when we look at stories that resonate with us, we're wanting to project the truths of who we are and what we want to be true. Even if it's not our current reality, we want that to be our desired reality, that dopaminergic activity inside of mesocortical limbic system. We want to make sure that there is an aspect of saying, that's me, and that's what I'm known to be as well. So
Mm,
this idea of going, the movie is projecting on the screen, but we ourselves are seeing that kind of a symbiotic projecting of, I want this to be me. Who doesn't want to be the hero? But I also recognize that there are parts of this story that are messy, they're scarring, they're ones that will forever stick, like Frodo with the mortar blade. He will carry that wound with him for the rest of his life. Yes, but isn't it interesting that as Frodo went through, and each time he put on the ring, he had the Sauron's scream, whatnot, and would stab the wound. He said, I can feel it, Sam, I can feel it. There is something about Frodo could have easily been an extraordinary hero that nobody could truly identify with. But the fact that he carried a pain that he simply could not relieve himself of, that pain of his own doing, that's something where people say, I know what it's like to carry something that I wish I could get rid of, but I can't.
mm.
But also, that wound, that scar, has shaped so much of my perspective and so much of how I go through this journey towards where I'm supposed to be.
You worked with many like larger companies. For many of our listeners are entrepreneurs that want to have those bigger companies.
Sure.
How do institutions like that leverage stories to influence our behavior?
What we're seeing is this truly interesting juxtaposition. I kind of geek on this a little bit. We're
Please, yeah.
seeing this juxtaposition in an increasingly generative world of AI and introducing technologies, AI agentic ecosystems that are coming out, with more and more people saying, like, hey, we're just going to do this where it's fully generative. You don't need to use CGI. We'll just type it in from a prompt, put it all together. There is something to be said about, people will forever want to do business with people, regardless of the vehicle or the conduit of technology that connects people. And that means that story will forever be a value of people. What does that look like for larger brands, Fortune 100s, people who I've been blessed to be inside the different meeting rooms, talking with SVPs, CEOs, incredibly powerful people whose names and faces a lot of people recognize, look at different magazines. I've been blessed to be in those rooms, in those conversations. They come back to, what is it that we want people to experience? Simple questions. But if we don't answer that with absurd accuracy, we're missing the mark for our customers. We're missing the mark for our shareholders. We're missing the mark from our brand congruency. That means if you're going to tell a story as a massive, Titan-sized brand, you need to do it with an understanding of who exactly is the hero in the story. Because one of the best things that Steve Jobs ever did was that he never positioned himself as the hero in
Mm,
any of Apple's marketing. He didn't say, I'm thinking differently. He invited you to say, think different. He
mm,
invited me to think different. He invited every Apple user to say, this is for the crazy ones, the square pegs in the round holes. This is for the rabble rousers. These are for the ones. And as people heard that, there is this guttural, visceral response saying, that's me. That's what I'm rising to. And that's one of the reasons why I keep this poster in my office, The Man in the Arena, because it is safe and comfortable right now to tell stories without conviction. It is safer
mm,
now than ever before to tell stories that risk nothing as a brand. But if you can take a stand with conviction, with a story that says this is worth taking a stance for, you will have this polarizing effect. And that's one of the best things you can do as a brand, is say, we are standing for this because this is worth standing for. And
Hmm.
some of the best brands in the world were built on lines drawn in the sand.
Wow. What do you love about the man in the arena?
I love that he acknowledges you're going to fail. But if you are doing this with every part of the dust and the blood and the tears, at least you're doing it while daring greatly, because the world is having this proliferation. There is this procreation of cold and timid souls throughout society, because we have been collectively pressured to say it's not worth it. Indifference is more comfortable. Taking a stance, you need to take a stance on that. Is it really that important? And what we've done is we essentially have inoculated
Hmm.
this idea of going, I need to stand for something. And we have subsequently chloroformed our courage. And that's where more and more people are saying, yeah, it's whatever. I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
And
where do you see the stories playing, if at all, in the meaning crisis of our culture today?
if we were to go into just a very honest conversation about this, the number one killer of men under the age of 40 worldwide right now is suicide.
Wow.
The number one killer. It's one where closely followed by opioid and other prescription drug overdoses. That suicide and mental health challenges is the number one killer, whether it's short term in the sense of suicidal ideation, or long term of disease that happens to be growing out of negative mental health.
Hmm.
10, 15, 20 years. Chronic depression untreated can often lead to terminal illness and disease in other areas of the body, because of how devastating negative mental health is on the human body. And we have to have an honest conversation as a society about saying, we have been so told, sit down, don't take a stand, it's okay. We're going to basically entertain and amuse you, and think of, just obsess yourself with things that are pixels and that really have no purpose. And we have amused ourselves out of our meaning. We have amused ourselves and entertained ourselves away from living a deeply purposeful life. But there is, I believe, and I believe you believe this too, that there is this awakening of purpose that is happening worldwide. People saying, I need to take a stance for something.
Hmm.
I need to live for something, because I've been so obsessed with pixels and glued to these stinking things for the last 10, 15 years. I've lost who I am.
Have you found, like anecdotally, that's a big test crowd, thousands of entrepreneurs. Is there a relationship between the clarity of their story, like why they started, whatever it was they were doing, and what their value proposition could be for their customer, and their buy into their own business?
One of my mentors from afar, as I've never directly worked with him, but a mentor, and I love being able to give credit where credit is due, said Myron Golden and Jim Rohn, two incredible mentors. But Jim Rohn, and the two of them say very similar takes on this, but essentially, again, I love giving credit where credit's due, where it's your financial success and observable success in life will rarely ever outpace the level of personal development you invest in. What that translates to is, going, if you want to have a stronger value proposition to your audience, if you want to have that profound clarity speaking from stage, you have to know with an absurd amount of conviction and clarity who you are, why you do, what you stand for, what you stand against, and why you are here. And to quote from Walt Whitman, it's that you may contribute a verse, that identity is where you find that purpose.
who you are, why you do what you do, what you're for, and what you're against.
Mhm.
That's a that's a great who you are, why you do what you do, what you're for, what you're against. What's the value of being clear on what one is for, what one is against in your estimation for our listeners?
If you don't know who you are, what you're for, and what you're against, it is not dissimilar than somebody who says, "I'm going to sit in this boat in the middle of the ocean, no anchor or sail, and let's just see where the waves take me."
Mm,
You will be kicked around. You basically will be swamped and shipwrecked quickly without an idea of going, what am I actually aiming towards? Why am I here in this sea of sameness, which is what we are experiencing right now, is this collective sea of sameness that people are stuck in. And for somebody to jump into this opportunity, I like telling people, before you ever step on stage, know who you are. Before you ever say, I can help people, how do you bring value to other people if you don't know your intrinsic value yourself?
mm. What relationship, if at all, is getting clear on who our listeners are, who they are, and navigating or burdening the angst of stepping in front of a crowd,
Sure.
metaphorically naked if they have clothes. Like, is
Sure.
there a relationship between that? Yeah, no, and the angst that comes with stepping on the stage. Because they say it's the second biggest fear or something. I haven't met. I don't know they. I don't know where they are, but they say a
Whoever
lot of
they are,
things.
they get a lot of press. No,
Yeah, they get a lot of
yeah.
press, right? So,
Well, and you can speak in front of a large group of people, but if you were to stand there saying, I have this cure for this incredible disease,
oh, this is good.
and you're speaking to the wrong crowd, the people with that disease will continue to suffer without that solution. And we put so much time and attention towards your physical ailments, the cure for cancer, which is devastating worldwide, and the cure for Alzheimer's and dementia and all these devastating diseases. And absolutely, these are crushing families with horrible loss. And in the same breath, saying, there is a lot to be said about families also suffering from terrible financial decisions, from terrible mental health, from terrible relationships and awful communication. And if you're standing there saying, I have this cure, I can cure the communication problems that have plagued your family for generations, if I can just get in front of the people who say, that's us, and we are desperate to find some way to communicate better. Do you happen to have the cure? I have it, and I'm glad you're in that seat because I see you.
Are you familiar with Thus Spoke Zarathustra?
The names, I can't say that I'm
Basically,
familiar
I
with it.
want to. I'll alliterate a little bit. So, in this book, Nietzsche, he comes down from the mountain
Sure.
and tells everyone, God is dead. We
Mm-hmm.
have killed him, and there's not enough water to wash away the blood. It's like he's telling everybody what the truth is. What
Sure.
this bold statement. So this is a question I wrote this down. Number one is be in front of the right audience.
Mm-hmm.
Tell if I. Number two, truth. A story to transport truth to. I wrote this down. A story to transport the facts, not facts to prove the facts. Like
Mm-hmm.
in that story, in this story, this uh, this man comes down from the mountain and tells everybody what's going on, and they laugh at him and they mock him, and he's the crazy guy or
Sure.
the truth inverts the vessel. It's not the proper medium. He didn't know his audience, and he's not persuading. So he becomes the mar or the pariah. If
The
you could
pariah.
speak to
Yes.
like what's the importance of, is it because that's why know your audience? Are you speaking to the right people? And in a way. it can be digested. So
What comes to mind when you hear the word endorphins?
like endorphins is exercise, like sexual
Like
promiscuity, like the
adrenaline, whatnot. People say, "Hey, I got my endorphin. I got my endorphin rush. The
yeah, it's
runner's
the an
high."
opening, maybe the right hemisphere. I don't know.
It's yeah, and it's one where it's not a quiz as it were, but it's one where endorphins typically are associated with like adrenaline junkies and jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, swimming with sharks, all these things where it's this idea like, oh, I got this adrenaline rush.
Euphoria.
Absolutely, this euphoria at the tail end of having experienced risk. And I thought that was the case as well for years. And then I
Mm.
connected with the head of neuroscience at the Semel Institute, UCLA, and I asked him, I said, what do you wish more people knew about endorphins? Specifically, different types of endorphins. There's alpha, beta, and gamma endorphins. So, what are the ones what do you wish more people knew? He said, I wish more people knew that endorphins isn't even about yourself. Endorphins is about risking your status quo, maybe even your livelihood or life for the benefit of someone else. He said, so think less adrenaline junkies and think more first responders, firefighters, law enforcement, military personnel, people who are running into an increasingly dangerous situation, risking their lives and livelihood to preserve and protect the lives and livelihood of others in danger's path.
Okay, so is it when we stand before the crowd, we're risking our future selves as a consequence of not of potentially being shamed out of the community? If I'm going in front of a crowd to present a potential probability, hey, there's a fire over there, or there's a cliff over there. If I'm wrong, I've just wasted everyone's time, et cetera, et cetera. There's however, if I'm right, I might be the next leader of the troop, and this is like deeply ingrained in our neuro physiology or something.
Sure. And on the behavioral neuroscience side of things, what you're doing is essentially risking your current status quo and your future reputation, making a bet on the belief of someone saying that you're right, and you carrying the burden of proof to validate that belief. And what does that look like? It's somebody being able to walk on stage and say to a whole
Huh.
1,000 CrossFit athletes, you can listen to your cardiologist and die of a heart attack, or you can listen to me in the next 6 minutes, I'll save your life.
Maybe that's why it's so scary because your death is temporally that's first, but this is like
Sure,
a second temporal. Your future self is potentially dead if you
sure.
screw it up. Like we go in front of, anecdotally, what are the general objections you hear from business owners, from entrepreneurs when because yeah, when they're introduced the idea of using story, leveraging stage to build their businesses? What are some of the common objections that you hear that maybe even our listeners are thinking?
Usually, what I hear from people is something, I'm not great in front of a crowd. I don't have a whole lot of experience, or I don't have great stories, or I don't know what's the best way for me to grow my business speaking from stage unless I get paid each time I speak. And some of the means that we need to rethink how we think about stage value. Stage value, of course, typically a lot of speakers are used to saying, I get paid a speaker fee. They say, we're going to contract for this. Here's your 50% down payment. You show up, you do this. At the end of your talk, here you go. Thank you so much. Standing ovation. And here's your check for the remaining 50%. And then you're going on to
Yeah.
the next event and the next and the next and the next. And what it does, you're just basically trying to stay ahead with a revenue model that constantly relies on you being at some event, on some stage, in front of some crowd. And the danger of that is that it's incredibly hard to keep up. It's not sustainable because it says, unless I'm on stage, I'm not making a dime. And you then essentially have amazing feast, famine. And what we need to think about is, how can you be paid better between stages? How can you create more value between stages to increase your stage and speaker fee? How can you leverage your talk so you can sell from stage without it feeling like you're selling from stage? How can you do this in a way where it invites people to see, I see myself, my current situation in what you are talking about in that story from stage. And I also see, based on that next story, how you can create the future that I crave right now. So on
Hmm.
the speaker side of things, a lot of the pushback that I hear is people saying, I'm not great on stage. Okay, then that's a question of at bats. I don't know what to say from stage. That's a question of content. I don't know how I would get booked on stage. That's a question of system. I don't know
Love it.
how to leverage my time best on stage to be paid the most between and during my speaking opportunities. All of those, as Marie Forleo says, are figure outable. All of those are details to figure out. And that's one I've been doing for the last almost 10 years, specifically with speakers, is helping you figure out where is your value currently? How can you leverage that best with speaking opportunities to be paid from stage? Because you don't have to speak for free just so you can speak for a fee. You can charge a fee from day one as a speaker with the right system and setup in place, but it takes a mindset shift. It takes a back-end infrastructure that can support that. And it takes embedding your offer inside your signature talk in a way that people say, I see contextually how that makes sense. And I don't feel like I was pitch slapped by your offer at the end of your talk.
What's a pitch slap look
Pitch
like?
slap is like when somebody gives a talk and they've gone along, and let's say it's a 30-minute talk and they've done great, amazing, it's all inspiring 20 minutes, and they say, then the next 10 minutes of the talk, the last 10 minutes of the talk is them talking about, here's my program and here's how great this is. And here's what it'll do for you. And here's what's going to be included, whatnot. So you're doing 10 minutes going great, 20 minutes, incredible. But then there's a clear transition into you're just making a sales pitch. And maybe I'd still buy from you, but this is not couched as something helpful. It's something as, please buy
Well,
my thing. Please, please,
what
please.
this is great. I love it. So what what how if at all, yeah, how if at all, or what are your thoughts on the role that the access to information that consumers have today
Mhm.
versus 20 years ago or even less plays in that dynamic between audience and speaker? I
Your
guess I'll be a little bit
audience,
more
go ahead. Yeah.
detail on this question. It's um, um, consume. We have more access to information. So in a sense, there's a greater awareness around content or perceived awareness around content. So that transition, do you think at some level it's heightened more in 2025 than in 1995? It could be heightened as for the feeling, the fight or flight, like, oh, is this authentic or not?
Well,
Because
there,
the
go ahead.
yeah, I'm thinking story, right? Authenticity, real. Now facts, facts, facts. That pattern interrupt, it's so blatant. Like that, right? It's so blatant, like, oh, okay. I'm like, ah. But what role could the internet and social media and our access to get information to just get like this conversation, like
Hmm?
we're thinking, we're you're thinking, I'm thinking, trying to, it's not preordained. So our
It's one
users are used to getting, being in control of the content. So I guess the question is like, um, how do you think that's changing or influencing the stages of the past?
one of the most beautiful things about us as human beings is that we are rationally unpredictable.
Mm.
Content is intended to be consumed with rational, logical consumption. But we have such a glut, such a Bacchus level feast where we are drunken on this idea of information that the key part we're missing is, what's the perspective? What's the learned experience that I can speak from, and not just what's an earned experience I can speak from instead of just a learned experience from a book or some article? Because we're having this conversation here. we're talking whatnot. But there is truly an unexpected element that at any point one of us could say something or do something or whatnot that it goes, that's a bit of a left turn. I didn't expect that. And you wouldn't expect to see such a left turn inside an article or inside a video on YouTube. It's been edited, it's been polished and put together. But the improv nature of our communication is what is going to be forever appealing to people, because I don't know what you're going to say next. I don't know what she's going to say next, or him, or whomever it might be. And when we speak from stage, people largely have this expectation of, I know what you're going to speak about because I saw your talk title and your description or whatnot. And I'm likely can guess you're going to tell a story to start out. I have no idea what that story is going to be. I have no idea of your background. It's when you look perfectly normal on stage. I would have never guessed that you were in traction on life support after a car crash. My goodness, you look like any other normal speaker on stage. And that unexpected nature of what shows up in the minds of the audience is delivered via story.
In the sense, what could otherwise be braggadocious could be empathetic and or empathy creating. Like if I got up and said, "Look what I've survived," or uh, like
And
I did this, and this happened to me. It's like the victim or the arrogant. But if I tell, on September 22nd, 2017, I was driving in an ATV with one of my best friends, Bill Mervin, 5 kids, driving 40 miles an hour on this side by side. I didn't have a helmet, I never did it before. And I didn't think he'd drive like he had 5 kids, but he turned left really fast.
mm,
And all of a sudden, I open my eyes and my head is right in front of a tree. And my right arm is stuck underneath this side by side. Bill, where are you? Now Bill and his buddy Robert are picking up. So, like that's in my head from that. It was like, I
absolutely.
was in an accident,
Yeah.
and I haven't talked about it enough. But now that you bring it up, but like that is embedded in my brain. If I were to say, look what I look at me, or go on a stage and say how great I am or something, or even talk about it but not tell the story, it could come across as a braggadocious or even just like a victim kind of thing. I don't know, curious your thoughts on that.
Why do we tell certain stories? And the question itself, I would say, it's meant to be rhetorical, because if I find myself telling a story, I'm saying, why am I telling the story? Whether it's at a dinner table conversation, one on one with a friend, or in front of 10,000 people from stage. Am I telling the story to make myself feel better, to validate myself, to somehow give myself the accolades? Because if that's the case, then how I framed that story does not serve my audience. And it would have been better if I didn't tell that story. But if I'm telling every story through the lens of saying, I'm telling this to my
Mm.
audience because I want them to know this about themselves, and I want them to see a better future through this story, that's completely different. Because you can tell a story about the side by side and about Bill and his whatnot. It's going, I survived. I taught myself how to walk again. Great, great, great. But if I tell that story and I say, I laid there realizing this might be the first time in my life that I ever truly can recall feeling helpless. And I had taken for granted all of what I was capable of before now. And if
All
we were to,
true.
uh-huh, and if we were to bring that saying, as I look out and I see your eyes, and I've sat in your seats, and we probably have very similar lives, straight the same suburban house with minivan and 2.5 kids and a white picket fence and whatever it might be, we likely have a lot of shared characteristics. But what we also probably share is that many of the things that we take for granted are our greatest abilities. And your ability to dream, to think differently, to dare greatly, to see a future that is greater than your current capacity, this is your chance to use that ability now before you hit a tree and you might never wake up.
Have you ever done a monologue?
I've done a variety of different monologues.
How, what have you learned about yourself from that type of
Well, it depends on how you want to.
presentation or
Sure. Well, and
yeah.
there are different types of monologues, as it were. I mean, really, if you the classic speech from stage is intended as a lecture, as it were, which is intended as a monologue. Now, whether it's a Greek tragedy or whether it's a university lecture or it's some type of even a TED talk, there's this concept of going, I want to be able to convey this one simple truth. And I want to convey it from somebody who says, I have the position of perceived authority and or experience, who can be able to introduce this idea or topic, maybe in a way that you've never heard before, but do it with the intent of confirming, contrasting, or at least shifting this deeply held belief that you've had for a while. What does that have to do with the monologue side of things? The
Mm.
first person who has to believe that monologue is the speaker. And that means when you put together your talk, whether it's a true monologue or whether something with a lot of audience engagement, you have people being able to speak into a couple different areas throughout the talk, the whole premise is going, I want to share with you this idea. And that idea happens to be wrapped as a talk from stage through me for such a time as this. And in that idea, it's going, I have so curated this idea that I will try to increase the potency of this idea as much as possible so that it doesn't miss the target, which is you.
When you're preparing, is there like how do you internalize? Do you have any tips or tacit knowledge you could share with our listeners of how to internalize a topic or to, you know, do you do you say the lines out loud in the ice bath or something?
It's like
You know what I'm saying? Like
I
at
do my
5
Wim
a.m.
Hof breathing while I'm trying to be able to put
Yeah,
this together.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it,
Um,
or is there anything I'm curious at that process? Is it a lot of visualization or lesser anything?
there are a couple different pieces with this. When you first put together a talk, I like saying you're not creating a talk for a group of people. You're not saying, oh, I'm going to create it for this audience. No, you're creating it for one person who happens to be the best representable persona of that audience. So
Yeah.
I'm creating a talk as if it's a one-on-one conversation. It happens to maybe expand to that to 10, 100,000, 10,000 people, whatever plus. But the whole point is I create every talk with this idea of going, if I have a one-on-one conversation with someone, what's this one truth I want to convey? And that sets up as the one big idea, the OBI. And through that lens is where I then start to put together all of these sub ideas that support that main idea. And
Hmm.
inside a talk, as you put it together, whether it's scripting, outline, or some kind of a hybrid of those two, you have your talk content put together. Then one of your best investments as a speaker is, of course, doing at bats. Get in front of windows and mirrors. Give
Hmm.
your talk in front of a mirror as much as you can. Give your talk in front of an open window. I have neighbors of houses just across the way there, whatnot. I guarantee you they have seen me several times stand at that window, give my talk for an upcoming event, whatnot, and it looks like I'm basically just kind of shouting or gesturing towards this open window. They probably think, is Jon mad at us? No, Jon's preparing, because I'd rather look ridiculous in front of that window, in front of that mirror, than look ridiculous on any type of stage. And you're internalized the more that, from a content standpoint, a talk is simply nothing more than a learned skill, specifically in delivering that specific talk.
How important are the reps?
Yep, the reps are important because what you're doing is you're inside your neural pathways. You have what they have myelin, which is essentially this insular or this insulation that is continuing to insulate the pathways of firing these different beliefs and ideas as you deliver that talk over and over and over again, you are continuing to insulate the neural pathways to have the consistency of that message
Why do
be
I
as clear as
forget?
possible.
Why do I forget? So I maybe on neuroscience wise, I'm doing this series on the 24 rules of life. Dr. Peterson's two of his
Sure.
four
Sure.
books, right? And so do I if I don't say the rules out loud every couple days, I'll start to lose them. The other day I confused Rule two in book one, really 12 rules. Rule
Sure.
two, um, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. And rule four, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. I actually got them confused, and I was live I was talking to myself on one of these podcasts. And I said rule four as rule two and couldn't remember rule four. And then I finally figured out that I had it backwards, and then why don't I remember rule four? But like, what's happening with this myelin or whatever, where, if you don't use it, you lose it. Because I've created these behavioral tendencies to intuitively to say, make sure maybe a couple of days I'll wake up and I'll say each rule out loud so I don't lose it. So if I have the rule, uh, that's a very important piece. I'm thinking heuristically to be able to talk about the concept. So,
Sure.
but what is it about the brain, or like from your experience and studies, that if you don't use it, you lose it? Like, and I have to say this every few days, or else I'm gonna forget, and then I've got to go through a process again of like internalizing these rules so I could talk about these topics.
So I will fully want to own that I have no PhD in neuroscience. I just happen to be pursuing postgraduate studies in neuroscience. So there are brilliant
Oh,
neuroscientists
that's awesome.
worldwide that have far more accomplished CVs, far more accomplished perspectives and advanced perspectives on this, who can speak to this to such depth and precision that I simply cannot at this point. So I fully own that. And what I can do is, knowing that we're on this podcast, that we're in this conversation, what I do know for certain is that there's a natural degradation inside the human brain that just simply happens due to stress, cortisol, as it were, through any number of things, aging, hormones, whatever it might be. And what we put our energy toward is what will absolutely be prioritized during our recall. And in your situation, say, hey, you forgot this the other day, but yet in the conversation just right here, you were able to recall rule two and rule four. But that experience of not recalling it created a bit of inside your amygdala, a bit of a fight or flight response. And your reaction was to move it into that frontal lobe and say, I want to make sure that I know this information so that I don't feel that fight or flight response. I'm actually going to re-cement this information in my mind to protect the mammalian type, or essentially the amygdala side of your brain, which is I don't feel safe because I don't recall this information correctly. How
Mm.
do I feel safer in the future? Having certainty of information and certainty of the accuracy of the information. Rule two, rule four, as an example.
Jon Cook, you're welcome back anytime. This is a master class. We got to do this again. If our listeners want to connect with you, bring you on their team, get them ready to go to the next level for their business using story to grow their business and get clear on their business purpose and their life, how do they get in contact with you fastest and bring you into their world?
Great question. So it's been such a joy to be able to share on this podcast, Jay. And thank you for this opportunity. And when somebody wants to connect and they've heard something that say that resonates with me, I see that there's this information that I need this inside my business. Best thing to do is go to keynotecontent.com/intake, fill out my intake form. It takes less than 4 minutes. Yes, my team has timed it. It takes less than 4 minutes. ask and answer a couple questions about your business, about where you are, what you care for, where you want to go this next year. And if we're the right fit, let's hop on a call. Let's talk about the next steps for there. That's the best place. And you can go any social media saying, hey, I'm not quite ready to fill out a form. I get that. You will not be spammed. Scout's honor, no spamming. You can connect with me at Keynote Content on any social media platform. I'm very active on LinkedIn and YouTube, and there we can put all the links inside the description if you like.
If you're listening to this, go do what Jon just said. Please share this with a friend that you know is dying to get on a stage and own it. And we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much.